Jim, Cole County authorities and volunteers have been searching for Elizabeth all day. KOMU8's Brooke Hash is at the scene. Brooke.
That the number of volunteers and law enforcement across the state have tripled.
On the morning of October 21, 2009, a 9-year-old girl named Elizabeth woke up in a small Missouri town and got ready for school like she had 100 times before. She packed her things, kissed her mother goodbye, and walked out the door of a house she would never sleep in again. By the time the sun went down, her name would be on the lips of every search volunteer in Cole County. By the end of the week, it would be on the lips of the entire country. And the most painful part of her story is not how it ended, it is how ordinary the day began. Her name was Elizabeth K. Olten. She was born on December 15, 1999 in Jefferson City, Missouri, the youngest of 5 children. She lived in St. Martin's, a quiet rural community just west of Jefferson City, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where children rode bikes until the streetlights came on, and where the woods behind the houses felt less like wilderness and more like an extension of the backyard. There were maybe 1,000 people in the whole town. 6 houses on her street. A close-knit community where doors were left unlocked and kids walked 4 houses down to a friend's place without a second thought. Elizabeth was a 4th grader at Pioneer Trails Elementary School. Her teachers remembered her as bright, attentive, and almost painfully polite. She raised her hand. She finished her homework. She made friends easily. She was, by every account, the kind of child who lit up a room without trying, a quiet, kind-hearted, slightly shy little girl with a soft voice and an enormous heart. Her favorite color was pink. Pink everything. Pink bedroom walls, pink clothes, pink shoes, pink Barbies stacked floor to ceiling in her bedroom. Her family used to joke that if a thing could be made in pink, Elizabeth wanted 3 of them. She loved music. Hannah Montana and Taylor Swift were her favorites. She knew every lyric to every song and would sing them at the top of her lungs, often using a hairbrush as a microphone. She loved dressing up. She loved animals, especially horses, and she would dress up her family's pets in tiny outfits and parade them around the living room like a one-girl talent show. She loved baking cookies with her mom. She loved doing puzzles. She loved the feeling of being useful, of helping set the table, of folding laundry beside her mother, of being trusted with small, grown-up jobs. Most of all, she loved her family. Her mother was Patricia Patty Carwell Prace, the steady center of Elizabeth's universe. Patty was raising her children largely on her own. Elizabeth's father, Dale Olten Sr., was incarcerated in 2009 on state drug charges, a fact the family carried quietly. But Elizabeth never seemed to lack for love. She had 2 older sisters, Stephanie and Candace, and 2 brothers, Anthony and Dale Jr. She had aunts, uncles, grandparents, and a great-grandmother, a sprawling, affectionate Missouri family that gathered for birthdays and holidays and Sunday dinners. Her older sister Stephanie would later tell a courtroom through tears that the love between her and Elizabeth was so strong that age didn't matter. That was the kind of bond Elizabeth had with her siblings. She wasn't the baby of the family in a bobbied way. She was the baby of the family in the way that made her precious. In the weeks leading up to that October day, Elizabeth had been particularly excited about one thing: the school play. She had landed a role she'd been hopping for, and she threw herself into rehearsals with the kind of full-bodied joy only a 9-year-old can muster. She practiced her lines in the kitchen while her mother cooked dinner. She practiced them in the car. She practiced them in the bath. She would grab her brother Anthony or her sister Candace and beg them to read the other parts so she could rehearse her cues. She wanted to be perfect. She wanted to make her mom proud. Patty would later say that watching Elizabeth practice for that play was one of the last clear, golden memories she had of her daughter, a small girl in pink pajamas, standing in the middle of the living room performing for an audience of 1. The street they lived on backed onto roughly 60 acres of woodland. To Elizabeth, those woods were not frightening. They were where the older kids went exploring. They were where the neighborhood children built forts and chased each other through the brush on warm afternoons. The Bustamante family lived just 4 houses down. Their youngest, 6-year-old Emma, was one of Elizabeth's regular playmates. The 2 little girls were in and out of each other's homes constantly. Emma's older half-sister, 15-year-old Alyssa, was someone Elizabeth had known for years, an older girl in the neighborhood, a familiar face, somebody's big sister. The kind of person a 9-year-old in St. Martin's would have no reason to fear. There was one thing about Elizabeth, though, that her mother knew without question. Elizabeth was terrified of the dark. She did not wander. She did not stay out late. She was a rule follower to the bone. If her mother said be home by 6, she was home by 5:50. Patty would later tell investigators with a kind of helpless certainty that her daughter would never have voluntarily stayed outside as the sun went down. It simply wasn't who Elizabeth was. October 21, 2009 began as a completely unremarkable Wednesday. Elizabeth rode the bus home from school with her brother Anthony. Their mother was in the kitchen starting dinner. Anthony invited two of the Bustamante boys, Alyssa's younger twin brothers, over to play. The house was full of the small, ordinary sounds of a family evening: cartoons in the background, pots on the stove, the murmur of children's voices. Then the doorbell rang. It was little Emma Bustamante standing on the front step in the fading afternoon light, asking if Elizabeth could come out and play. Hattie's first answer was no. It was a school night, dinner was almost on the table, but Elizabeth heard Emma's voice from the hallway and came running. The two girls clasped their hands together and begged, the way only 9- and 6-year-old girls can beg, bouncing on their toes, eyes wide, promising they would only be a minute, promising they would be careful, promising they would come right back. Hattie looked at her daughter's hopeful face and felt herself softening. 1 hour, that was the deal. Home by 6 o'clock sharp, not a minute later. Elizabeth lit up. She hugged her mother, grabbed her cell phone, and ran out the door with Emma. Patty went back to the stove. The clock on the wall read just after 5. The sun was still up. The street was quiet. The woods behind the house rustled softly in the evening breeze. It was the last time Patty Price would ever see her daughter alive. 4 houses down the same quiet road in St. Martin's, behind a front door that looked just like every other front door on the street, lived a 15-year-old girl who had already decided she wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. She had written it down. She had told her friends. She had drawn it in her notebooks. And in the week before Elizabeth Olten knocked on no door, walked through no gate, and trusted no stranger, this girl had taken a shovel into the woods behind her house and dug 2 graves in the soft Missouri soil. She had then gone to school, smiled at her teachers, posted on social media, and waited. Her name was Alyssa Daleen Bustamante, and the most disturbing thing about her, according to every adult who later studied her, was how completely normal she had managed to look. Alyssa was born on January 28, 1994 in Cole County, Missouri. From the very beginning, her life was shaped by absence. Both of her biological parents were struggling with severe substance abuse. Her father cycled in and out of jail throughout her childhood, his letters to her arriving from one correctional facility after another. Her mother battled her own addictions and would disappear for long stretches on what relatives described as drug binges. There were periods when Alyssa and her younger siblings had no idea where either parent was. There were periods when there was no food in the house, no clean clothes, no adult voice calling them to dinner. Eventually, the children were taken in by Alyssa's maternal grandparents, Karen and Gary Bustamante, who would later be granted full legal custody. Karen and Gary were, by every available account, decent people doing their best with a situation they had not asked for. They took in Alyssa, her half-sister Emma, and her 2 younger twin brothers. They put them in school. They put food on the table. They went to church together. The family was actively involved in the local Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and Karen tried hard to give the children a structured, loving home. But the damage that had been done in the early years could not be erased by stability alone. By the time Alyssa hit puberty, the cracks began to show in ways no grandmother could paper over. She started cutting, first her arms, then her legs. The cuts were not impulsive, they were deliberate, methodical, and over time she began carving actual words into her own skin. She wrote things on her flesh the way other teenage girls wrote things in their diaries. She told friends she liked the way it felt. She told them she liked the way it looked. She told them in the kind of flat, matter-of-fact tone that should have terrified every adult around her that pain was interesting. In 2007, when she was 13 years old, Alyssa attempted suicide by overdose. She was rushed to the hospital, stabilized, and admitted to a psychiatric facility for evaluation. The clinicians who assessed her noted that she was intelligent and articulate, but also angry, defiant, and unusually preoccupied with violence. She was diagnosed with major depressive disorder. Later assessments would add borderline personality disorder to her file. She was prescribed antidepressants, specifically the SSRI Prozac, and released back into her grandmother's care. Karen took her to her follow-up appointments. Karen made sure she took her medication. Karen did, by every measure, the things a loving guardian is supposed to do. It wasn't enough. What Karen did not see, what perhaps no one in the household fully saw, was the second life Alyssa was building online. On her MySpace profile, the section where most teenage girls listed things like singing, shopping, dancing with my friends, Alyssa had typed 2 words: cutting and killing people. She listed killing people as a hobby, not as a joke, not buried in some private message. Right there on her public profile where anyone could see it. Her Twitter feed was filled with rage, posts about hatting authority, hatting being told what to do, hatting the world. One of her posts, often quoted in news coverage of the case, read simply, "Bad decisions make great stories." She had a YouTube channel as well. On it, she had posted a video she had filmed herself titled "Idiots Getting Electrocuted by Electric Fence." In the video, she could be seen daring her younger twin brothers, small boys, maybe 7 or 8 years old, to touch an electric fence she already knew would shock them. When they did, when their small bodies jerked from the current, she laughed. She told her boyfriend she wanted to know what it was like to kill someone. She told her friends she had a fantasy about burning a house down with a family inside it. There was a photograph, later cited in court filings, of Alyssa holding a knife to another girl's throat, a posed picture, treated by everyone in it as a joke. Her diary, the one investigators would eventually seize, was filled with violent imagery, dark drawings, and entries that grew increasingly fixated on the desire to hurt someone, anyone, just to see what it would feel like. None of this was visible from the outside. To her teachers, Alyssa was a quiet, sometimes sullen but generally unremarkable student. To her church-going neighbors, she was the troubled girl Karen and Gary were so kindly raising. To the younger children on the street, including little Elizabeth Olten, she was simply Emma's older sister, a teenager who sometimes played with them, sometimes ignored them, but had always been part of the background of their small-town childhoods. In the days before October 21, 2009, the pattern in her diary began to change. The entries became sharper, more focused. She had a plan now. She had a school day off coming up Friday, October 16, and she used it. According to prosecutors' later testimony, that was the day she walked into the woods behind her grandmother's house with a shovel and dug. She did not dig one grave, she dug two. One for Elizabeth, investigators would later believe. The second one's intended occupant has never been definitively confirmed, but multiple law enforcement sources at the time speculated that Alyssa may have been preparing for her younger brothers, the same brothers she had laughed at as they touched the electric fence. She covered the holes loosely with leaves and brush. She went back to school the following Monday. She sat in class. She smiled at the right moments. She came home in the afternoons and ate dinner with her grandmother. She went to bed. She woke up. She waited. On Wednesday, October 21, Alyssa skipped school. She told no one. She moved through the day with the strange, suspended calm of someone who has already decided what is about to happen. By late afternoon, she was in her bedroom at the back of the house, watching the road through her window. She had her cell phone in her hand. She had a knife within reach. She knew which neighbor's child would be coming over that evening because she had set it in motion herself. She had told her little half-sister Emma to walk down the street and ring the Oltens' doorbell. At a few minutes past 5, the doorbell rang at Patty Price's house. A 6-year-old voice asked if Elizabeth could come out and play. And 4 houses away, in a bedroom with writing on the walls, Alyssa Bustamante picked up her phone and got ready to make the call that would lure a 9-year-old girl into the woods. The sun was already starting to lean west by the time Elizabeth Olten stepped out of her front door on October 21, 2009. The light in St. Martin's that evening was the soft amber of mid-autumn, long shadows on the lawn, leaves the color of rust drifting across the road, a chill creeping into the air that hinted dinner would feel warm and good when everyone sat down. Elizabeth was in pink. She always was. Her cell phone was in her pocket. Her hand was in Emma's hand. She skipped down the sidewalk the way 9-year-olds skip when they think nothing in the world can touch them. The clock on Patty Price's kitchen wall read just after 5. Patty stirred the pot on the stove. Outside, her daughter laughed. Inside, dinner simmered, and the universe for one more minute still made sense. The 2 little girls did not go straight to the Bustamante house. Emma later told investigators that the pair wandered through the neighbors' yards, darting in and out of bushes, slipping between fences the way children do when their world is small and safe and theirs. Somewhere along that wandering path, 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante appeared. She had been watching. She had been waiting. According to what Emma eventually told police, Alyssa joined the girls outside and after a few minutes told her little half-sister to go home, to leave her and Elizabeth alone. Around that same moment, Elizabeth's phone rang. The call, according to phone records later pulled by investigators, came from Alyssa. The exact words said on that call have never been made fully public, but what is known is this. Alyssa told Elizabeth she had a surprise for her, something exciting, something worth seeing, and it was waiting just a little way into the woods behind the houses. Emma, dismissed and confused, drifted back toward her grandmother's yard. The last thing she saw, she would later tell detectives, was Elizabeth and Alyssa walking off together. A 9-year-old girl in pink, holding the hand of a teenager she had known her whole short life. It took roughly 15 minutes to walk into the part of the woods Alyssa had chosen. There was no trail, there was no reason to be there. The brush was thick, the ground uneven, the light fading fast under the canopy of trees. Somewhere in that walk, Elizabeth must have realized something was wrong. She was a child who was afraid of the dark. She was a child who had been told to be home by 6. Investigators have always believed, based on the path and the timing, that Elizabeth tried to turn back. They believe she asked to go home. What happened next is known only because Alyssa Bustamante eventually confessed to it. According to court records and the testimony of Missouri State Highway Patrol Sergeant David Rice, the officer who would later draw the truth out of her in an interrogation room, Alyssa attacked Elizabeth in the woods. She strangled the 9-year-old with her bare hands. She used a kitchen knife she had brought with her from the house and cut Elizabeth's throat. She then stabbed her, by prosecutors' count, 8 times in the chest. The medical examiner's findings, later cited in court, confirmed all 3 methods of attack: strangulation, a cut to the throat, and multiple stab wounds. There is no merciful way to write what happened in those woods. There is no narration that can soften it. A 9-year-old child who that morning had been practicing lines for a school play and asking her mother if she could go out for 1 hour, was murdered by someone she trusted, in a place she could not run from, while the rest of her family was 4 houses away setting the table for dinner. When it was over, Alyssa dragged Elizabeth's small body to one of the holes she had dug 5 days earlier. The grave was shallow. She had covered it loosely with leaves and brush, not a careful concealment, but the work of someone who believed the woods would do the rest. She left Elizabeth there, then she walked out of the trees, up the hill, and back toward her grandmother's house. Elizabeth's older brother Anthony was the first witness to something not quite right. He was 13. His mother had grown anxious as the clock ticked toward and then past 6, and she had sent him outside to look for his sister. He told the court later that he saw Alyssa Bustamante walking up the hill from the woods with little Emma. He said he heard Alyssa lean down to her 6-year-old half-sister and say very clearly, "Don't tell anyone." Emma told Anthony that Elizabeth had already gone home. Anthony, sensing nothing yet but feeling a creeping unease, turned back to look for her again. Back at the house, Patty Price was at the window. It was 6:15 p.m. Her daughter was 15 minutes late, and Elizabeth was never late. The sun was setting. The street was darkening. Patty called Elizabeth's cell phone. It rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. She tried again, voicemail. Her stomach dropped. She called Karen Bustamante next, expecting to be told Elizabeth was just on her way. Instead, Karen said something that would change Patty's life forever. Karen said Elizabeth had never been at her house. She said she had no idea Emma had even gone to ring the Oltens' doorbell. She said she was sorry and she was confused and she did not know where Elizabeth was. Patty hung up. She picked the phone back up. She called 911. Police were at her front door by 6:30 p.m. What followed that night was the kind of search no parent ever wants to be at the center of. Officers fanned out across the small neighborhood. Flashlights swept the woods. Officers knocked on every door on the street. The Bustamante house was visited along with the others. Karen and Gary appeared shocked, distraught, eager to help. Emma was questioned briefly. Alyssa was somewhere in the house. Within hours, nearly a third of the entire town, roughly 300 volunteers, had joined the search. Helicopters were called in. Dive teams were brought to the nearby creek. Sniffer dogs were deployed into the woods. The FBI was contacted before the night was over. Patty did not sleep. She stood on her porch staring into the dark, calling her daughter's name, watching strangers carry flashlights through the trees behind her house. Investigators worked the phone data fast. Elizabeth's cell phone was pinging. It was still active, still transmitting, and the location it was pinging from was deep in the woods behind the Bustamante home. They closed in on that area at first light, but before they could pinpoint it, the phone went dead. The battery, after a long night of pings into the cold autumn air, gave out. The signal disappeared. Within 24 hours, a strange detail had begun to surface. A search team combing through the woods discovered a hole freshly dug, deliberately shaped, then covered back over with loose soil. There was nothing inside it, but it was the size and shape of a grave. It was empty, which meant somewhere out there was another one, and whatever was in that one was the thing the entire town of St. Martin's was searching for. The empty hole in the woods changed everything. Until the moment a volunteer search team stumbled onto that strange, freshly dug pit and saw the way it had been deliberately covered back over with loose soil. Investigators had still been operating under the careful, hopeful theory that Elizabeth Olten might have wandered off, might have gotten lost, might somehow, against the cold autumn night and her terror of the dark, still be out there alive. The empty grave ended that theory. Someone had dug it, someone had covered it. And whoever that someone was, they were almost certainly within walking distance of Patty Price's front door. Sergeant David Rice of the Missouri State Highway Patrol had already been quietly building a picture in his head. He was not a man given to dramatic conclusions, but the small, accumulating details of the case were starting to point in one direction. Emma Bustamante, the 6-year-old who had knocked on the Olten door, had now told police a second, very different version of her story, one in which her older half-sister, 15-year-old Alyssa, had been outside with them that evening and had sent Emma away. One in which Emma later noticed something that looked like blood on Alyssa's clothes. One in which Alyssa had been the last person seen with Elizabeth. The cell phone data backed up the geography. Elizabeth's phone had pinged in the woods directly behind the Bustamante home. The holes already noticed in the Bustamante's yard matched the shape of the empty grave just discovered. A warrant was issued for a full search of the Bustamante residence. What investigators found inside Alyssa's bedroom troubled even the most seasoned officers on the scene. Writing covered the walls, words, phrases, drawings, some of it in what appeared to be blood. There was a sketched outline of a human figure with the name Emma written beside it, her own 6-year-old sister. Cards from her incarcerated father were buried under piles of objects on the floor. And then there was the diary. The diary was seized and handed over to Sergeant Rice. He read it carefully. Most of it was the wandering, dark, melodramatic writing of a deeply troubled teenager, but one entry stopped him cold. It had been written in blue pen and then violently scribbled over as if she had tried to erase it. Investigators ran the page under proper light, examining the back of the paper where pen impressions could still be read. Slowly, the original text came into focus. The first words he could make out were slit and throat. By holding the page up the right way, by piecing the impressions back together, the full entry emerged. It had been written on October 21, 2009, the same day Elizabeth disappeared. It read, "I just ***ing killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throat and stabbed them. Now they're dead. I don't know how to feel at the moment. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the, oh my god, I can't do this feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kind of nervous and shaky right now though. Okay, I gotta go to church now. Lol." Rice called Alyssa in for a formal interview. Her grandmother Karen came with her. A juvenile officer sat in. Rice's strategy was simple and brutal in its patience. He would ask a question, then sit in complete silence, sometimes for a full minute at a time, waiting for her to fill the void. She lied at first. She said she had gone to school. She had not. She said she had gone for a walk alone in the woods that afternoon. She mapped out the route on a printed aerial photograph Rice slid across the table. She admitted to digging holes in the forest, but said she just liked to dig holes, that she sometimes buried dead animals. She said when she got home she had heard Emma calling for help outside and had gone to assist her sister. She said she had no idea what had happened to Elizabeth. Rice listened. He let her finish. Then he told her very quietly that they had read her diary. He told her that they had found the entry she had tried to scratch out. He told her that what was written on a piece of paper, even if you tried to cover it, does not go away. He told her that this family needed closure, that if this was an accident they could deal with that she needed to tell the truth. For a long, suffocating stretch of silence, Alyssa Bustamante said nothing. Then, in a small voice, she said that Elizabeth had fallen, that she had hit her head, that she had died, that Alyssa had panicked and burned the body and didn't know what to do. It was a lie and Rice knew it, but it was the first crack. He pushed harder. He told her an autopsy would tell them everything. Was Elizabeth's throat cut, he asked. Yeah, she whispered. Her grandmother Karen, sitting beside her, broke. Oh my god, she said. Grandma, oh my god. Alyssa then agreed to take Rice to where Elizabeth was. She rode in a patrol vehicle into the woods behind her own house, and she pointed to the shallow grave covered in leaves where she had buried the 9-year-old girl 5 days after digging the hole. Elizabeth Olten was finally brought home. Alyssa Bustamante was placed under arrest. She was charged on November 18, 2009 with first-degree murder and armed criminal action. A Cole County judge ruled that she would be tried as an adult. She entered a not guilty plea. Soon after, her attorneys requested she be sent to Fulton State Hospital for psychiatric evaluation. The judge granted the order. The case did not go to a full trial, the prosecution feared. Given Alyssa's age and the complex psychiatric record, that a jury might hesitate to convict on first-degree murder, Cole County prosecuting attorney Mark Richardson worked toward a plea deal. On January 10, 2012, 18 days before her 18th birthday, Alyssa Bustamante stood in court and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and armed criminal action. As part of the deal, she had to describe in her own words exactly what she had done. The courtroom went silent as she did. Sentencing began on February 6, 2012. It would last 9 hours a day for 2 days. Witness after witness took the stand. Patty Price spoke first for the prosecution. She described October 21, 2009 as a normal day. She described her last memory of her daughter as a happy little girl. When she rose to give her statement directly to Judge Patricia Joyce, she was shaking so hard the judge eventually had to ask her to stop. I will just say that I hate her, Patty told the court. I hate everything about her. She called Alyssa not human, she called her a monster. Stephanie Adrian, Elizabeth's eldest sister, cried as she said the words, "The love that my sister and I shared was so strong that age didn't matter." The defense called psychiatrists. They presented the diagnoses of major depressive disorder and borderline personality disorder. They argued that her prescribed antidepressants may have intensified violent impulses. They presented the abuse, the abandonment, the childhood from hell. The judge listened to all of it. Then, she sentenced Alyssa Daleen Bustamante to life in prison for second-degree murder plus a consecutive 30 years for armed criminal action. The sentences were to be served back-to-back. In the gallery, Alyssa's grandparents, the only two people who had stood beside her through everything, quietly stood up and walked out of the courtroom. Witnesses said it was the moment Alyssa's face finally changed, the moment she finally seemed to understand that she was at last completely alone. When Patty Price walked out of the Cole County Courthouse on the day Alyssa Bustamante was sentenced, she did not feel relief. She did not feel closure. She felt only the strange, hollow weight of a sentence that would never balance the scales. Her daughter was gone. A teenager who had murdered that daughter for the thrill of finding out what killing felt like was going to prison. And those two facts sitting beside each other would never make the math come out even for the rest of Patty's life. What she did not yet know, standing on those courthouse steps in February of 2012, was that the legal nightmare was far from over. It would, in fact, follow her for more than a decade, and it follows her still. Just months after Alyssa's sentencing, the United States Supreme Court handed down a ruling in Miller v. Alabama, a decision that prohibited mandatory life sentences without the possibility of parole for juvenile offenders. The ruling rippled through every state in the country, including Missouri, and it reached directly into the corner of Cole County, where Patty was still trying to rebuild a life from the ruins. Under Missouri's revised laws, Alyssa Bustamante, sentenced to life plus 30 years, would now be eligible for a parole hearing. Patty had been told at sentencing that her daughter's killer would not see a parole board until she was old. That promise, like so much else, would not hold. Alyssa appealed her plea in 2013 and again in subsequent years, arguing that her constitutional rights had been violated and that her defense had been ineffective. A judge denied her requests. She filed motions to vacate her plea. Those were also denied. In 2014, her direct appeal of her sentence was rejected. She remained at the Chillicothe Correctional Center in Chillicothe, Missouri, where she is incarcerated to this day. For Patty, the legal fight expanded outward. In October 2012, she filed a wrongful death lawsuit not only against Alyssa Bustamante but against Pathways Behavioral Healthcare, the mental health provider that had treated Alyssa in the years before the murder. Patty's argument was that the warning signs had been visible, documented, loud. A girl whose self-described hobbies were cutting and killing people. A girl who had carved words into her own arms. A girl who had attempted suicide, been hospitalized, and been released back into the community where a 9-year-old child lived 4 houses away. Patty believed the clinic had a duty to warn, a duty it had failed. The case against the hospital was ultimately dismissed, in part because of the legal confidentiality protecting patient records. The wrongful death suit against Alyssa herself was successful. A court ordered Alyssa Bustamante to pay Patricia Price $5 million plus 9% interest for the death of Elizabeth. It was a verdict, not a remedy. There was no $5 million, there never would be. Patty took the judgment for what it symbolized, an acknowledgement in writing of what had been taken from her. Then in 2021, a phone call arrived that gutted her all over again. Missouri Senate Bill 26, combined with the earlier Supreme Court ruling, had moved the goalpost again. Juvenile offenders convicted of murder would now be granted full parole hearings within 15 years of their crime. October 21, 2024 would mark 15 years since Elizabeth's death. Patty received an automated call on Mother's Day of 2024, Mother's Day of all days, inviting her to attend Alyssa Bustamante's parole hearing, scheduled for July 8, 2024. She wrote about it publicly. She begged the community to help. She signed petitions. She gave interviews. She told reporters that the parole hearing felt like burying her daughter all over again. The parole board denied Alyssa Bustamante release, but under Missouri law, she will be eligible to apply again. Patty Price has now spent more years fighting to keep her daughter's killer in prison than she got to spend raising her daughter. The community of St. Martin's has never been the same. The street where Elizabeth and Alyssa lived 4 houses apart still exists. The woods are still there. But the neighborhood children who used to wander between yards now wander less. Doors that were left unlocked are locked. A generation of parents who had once thought of small-town Missouri as a kind of inoculation against the worst of the world learned, the hardest possible way, that there is no such inoculation. Elizabeth School, Pioneer Trails Elementary held memorials. Pink ribbons appeared on lawns. Her face, round-cheeked, smiling, framed by light brown hair, became one of those faces that an entire region simply cannot forget. Elizabeth's family has continued with extraordinary courage to speak her name. Her sister Stephanie, Her brother Anthony, who was the one who saw Alyssa walking up out of the woods and heard her tell 6-year-old Emma to stay quiet. Her father Dale, who has spoken publicly about the guilt of having been incarcerated and unable to protect his daughter. And above all, Patty, who has become, through no choice of her own, one of the most resilient advocates for victims' rights in the state of Missouri. The case has been covered in countless news segments, podcasts, magazine features, and documentary series. Paramount Plus produced Murder 360. Elizabeth is Missing, examining the case in detail. Crime journalists return to it again and again, not because it is sensational, but because it forces every person who reads it to confront questions that have no comfortable answers. How does a child become capable of this? How many warning signs must a system see before it acts? What do we owe the troubled? What do we owe the innocent? And what happens when those two duties collide on a quiet street in a town of 1,000 people? There are no clean answers. There never will be. But what can be said clearly and without qualification is this: a 9-year-old girl who loved Hannah Montana, who loved Pink, who loved her mother, who was practicing her lines for a school play, did nothing wrong. She trusted a neighbor. She walked into the woods on a Wednesday evening because she believed there was a surprise waiting for her. The surprise was not what she had been promised. The world she walked into that evening was not the world she had been raised to believe in. And so at the end of all of this, after the searches, the confessions, the diaries, the courtrooms, the appeals, the parole hearings, the lawsuits, the years, what remains is a single small fact. A fact that no law and no sentence and no documentary can ever undo. Elizabeth K. Olten was born on December 15, 1999. She lived for 9 years, 10 months, and 6 days. She was loved completely by people who would have given anything to keep her safe. She was funny and bright and gentle and brave. She wanted to be on a stage. She wanted to sing. She wanted to grow up. Her name was Elizabeth. She was 9 years old. She deserved every birthday that was stolen from her. She deserved the school play. She deserved the lead role. She deserved to grow into the woman she was on her way to becoming. The world is smaller without her in it, and Patty, somewhere tonight, is still listening for the sound of her daughter's voice singing along to the radio just one more time.